Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parshas Bay, and we will begin Perek Yud Beis, chapter 12, Pasuk Yud Gimel, verse 13. Now, at this point in the Parsha, this is where Moshe has already warned Paro about the last of the 10 plagues, the Makas Bechiris, the smiting of the firstborn. And he tells the Jewish people also about slaughtering the Karban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice. And Perek Yud Beis, chapter 12, Pasuk Gimel, verse 13 reads, Moshe told them they're supposed to take the blood of the Paschal sacrifice and smear it on their doors, the doorposts, the lintel on top. And the pasuk reads, the blood shall be for you as a sign on the homes that you were in there. Hashem says, I will see the blood, ufasachti aleichem, and I shall pass over you. And the plague will not be as a destruction when I smite in the land of Egypt. If the Jewish people wanted to be spared from Makas Bechiris, the smiting of the firstborn, Hashem says what you have to do is you have to put a sign on your doors. And that sign is the blood of the Karban Pesach, the blood of the Paschal sacrifice. And Hashem says that when I see that, I will pass over, I will skip over your homes. Now let me ask you a question. If I'm saying to you, if Hashem is saying to the Jewish people, if you put blood on your doorpost, I will pass over your homes, right? So where are the Jewish homes located that they need to be skipped over? If you're saying that the Jewish home is going to be skipped over, so where is this Jewish home located? Is it, where is it that we're saying that it's being passed over? Now, if the Jewish people we know were, let me try to make it, let me make my question a little clearer. The Jewish people lived where when they were slaves? Where did they live? So when Yaakov came down to Egypt, there was a special area called Goshen, right? That's where they lived. So if Hashem is telling them, smear the door on your doorposts so that when I come to Goshen, right, I will pass over your homes. Is that the way you say it? I'll pass over your homes? I mean, everybody's Jewish there, right? It's a Jewish neighborhood. Everybody's Jewish there. And okay, they're in the land of Egypt, so they have to do something to make sure that the plague of the firstborn doesn't come to them. So Hashem says, put blood on your doorposts. Is that called that he's passing over, that he's passing over them?
It's not.
Doesn't sound like that, right? I mean, if it's an area of just Jewish people, and Hashem is saying, okay, you want to make sure the plague doesn't come by you, put blood on your doors.
Even don't play. I know with Goshen.
Excuse me?
Because if they live only Goshen, you can know exactly where they are. Probably they now living inside Mitzrayim.
Okay. Now, first of all, so you're making a good point. Now, let me just clarify what you're saying. Are you saying that, I mean, Hashem knows who's a Jewish home, who's not a Jewish home, right? Right? He knows. But the point is, he wants to see the Jewish people have to show a sign, right? They have to show that they slaughter the Karban Pesach. They'll put it outside on the doorpost. They're not embarrassed, not ashamed, right? So that can happen. Hashem can want that even in Goshen, right? He can want that in Goshen too. But your point is well taken. That, and again, I'm a little bit struggling with this, but when you talk about Pasach, I'm going to pass over your homes. It sounds like they're amongst Egyptian homes, and Hashem is going to pass over them. When Hashem is smiting a Jewish Egyptian home, and then it comes to a Jewish home, you pass over that home and you go to the next home, right? That's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like. I don't know. Again, maybe you could say it means just leaving over the whole land of Goshen, but skipping over, passing over, sounds like that when he's smiting, there's going to be the Egyptian home, and he's going to smite the Egyptian home and pass over the Jewish home. That's what it sounds like. So then the question is, if that's what it means, but weren't the Jews in Goshen?
No.
What?
It
looks like they were not.
No.
But seemingly, they were supposed to be in Goshen, weren't they? Wasn't that the original plan?
After a while, they moved.
Okay, was that good? Was that the right thing? Well, you were going to say that they started in Goshen, but then they started moving amongst the Egyptians. Was that good? Was that part of Yaakov's plan?
No,
it definitely wasn't. So let's talk about this a little bit. The comment is a comment from Hamek Dover, from the Netziv, and we know actually from Midrashim the same idea. And he's going back in Parsha Shmos, where it says, "Uvnei Yisrael paru vayishritzu vayirbu vayatzma ma'id ma'id." That means the children of Israel were fruitful, they swarmed, they increased, they became very strong. Vatimalei ha'aretz oisam, and the land became filled with them. The land became filled of them. It became full of them. So there is a medrash that says this. I mean, maybe it doesn't say it exactly like this, but the way that it says, the way to explain these words, that the land became full of them is that not only was Goshen full of them, which is where they were supposed to be, but the land became full of them. And the wording that the Netziv says is, wherever there was an open space, wherever there was place, they went there, the Jews. They went there. It was time to get out of the Jewish ghetto, and it was time to live amongst the Egyptians, and wherever they could find where to go, they went. The land became filled with them. If there was an open spot, then that's where they went. That's where they went. Now, says the Netziv, that's what it means by Makas B'chayris, that Hashem passed over the Jewish homes. Because as he said, the Jews were living amongst the Egyptians. There were Jewish homes amongst the Egyptians. And therefore Hashem says those Jews have to put the blood on their doorposts, and when they do that, Hashem will pass over their homes. Now, I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't know what the answer to what I'm going to say right now is. So in Goshen, do they have to do that too? I don't know. Here it says, you do it, and I'll see it, I'll pass over. It sounds like that's, again, it's connected. So if Hashem didn't have to pass over, did you not have to put the blood on the doorposts? I don't know. Question. But this is how the Netziv is explaining what it means, I will pass over. That the Jewish people, the original plan of Yaakov was the Jews should be in Goshen, but they started spreading out. Okay, they started spreading out. And that's why Hashem says, I'm going to skip over your homes. And it's very interesting because the wording of the Netziv is, this is why by the smiting of the firstborn, it says Hashem will skip over the door. This implies that there were many Jewish homes amongst the Egyptians. How does he know there were many? Maybe there were only a few. How does he know there were many? It says Hashem will skip over the homes. Maybe it was a few homes. But I think the answer is that the whole holiday is called Pesach, right? The carbon is called Pesach. And Pesach means to pass over. The word Pesach is to commemorate what we have a carbon Pesach, right? It's to commemorate that how Hashem skipped over the Jewish homes. So if the skipping over the Jewish homes plays such a big part of the holiday, right? It must have been something very relevant. It wasn't just because of a few homes. It was because there was many Jewish homes amongst the Egyptians. And therefore, Hashem skipping over those homes was a very big thing.
Everybody celebrates Pesach.
That's right, because there's more to Pesach than just skipping over the homes. But the point is that it plays such a central theme. It's such an important part of the holiday that it must be that it was something that it's very logical to say that it was a very relevant thing. It was a very big part of what happened. So there were many Jews that were living amongst the Egyptians. Now, as I asked you before, was that good or was that not good? That they left Goshen and lived amongst the Egyptians. Why did they decide to leave Goshen and go amongst the Egyptians? Why did they do that? So the Tziv continues. Kol zeh. Okay. Now the Tziv says, now why is that? What is the point of the Torah? Again, this is back in Parsha Shmos. This is before the Torah talks about how Pharaoh began to enslave the Jewish people. The Tziv says, the pasuk is coming when it tells us this, that the Jewish people filled the land. It's coming to explain to us how this was a cause. This was something that brought about the hatred of the Egyptians and the decrees that they made upon us and the suspicion they had on us. Pharaoh said to his people, the Jewish people, there's going to be a war, they're going to join the enemy. What kind of business is that? That's a conspiracy theory. That there's no basis for that. How did this all come about? All this happened because they desired to abandon the will of Yaakov, their forefather. He wanted them to live only in the land of Goshen. So that they should be separate from the Egyptians. Well, they didn't want to do that. They spread out. They wanted to be amongst the Egyptians. The Medrash says, Mishameis Yosef Pasku Milamo. The Medrash says that after Yosef died, the Jewish people stopped circumcising their children. And the question is, what's the connection? What does the death of Yosef have to do one with the other? The answer is, Mishameis Yosef. Where I'm sorry, the point is as long as Yosef was alive, he didn't let them go amongst the Egyptians. But once he died, that's when they said, okay, we're breaking out of the Jewish ghetto, we live amongst the Egyptians. You're living amongst the Egyptians, they didn't want to be different, so they stopped circumcising their children. And this is why, as the Medrash says, when the Jewish people stopped circumcising, the Medrash cites a pasuk in Tehillim that says, "Hafach Hashem libam l'snei amay." Hashem turned the heart of Egyptians to hate the Jewish people because they wanted to be more like the Egyptians. Hashem put a hatred in the heart of the Egyptians for the Jewish people. These are all part of the bringing about of the enslavement. The Netziv has this theme in many places. His theme is that when we want to become like the Goyim, we want to become like the non-Jews, you know what they do to us? They push us away. If we want to become like them, they push us away. And this is what happened in Egypt. Yaakov and Yosef wanted them in Goshen to be separate. And as long as they were separate, everything was good. But once Yosef died, that's when the Jewish people, the land became filled with them. The land became filled, the whole land became filled with them. Wherever they can go, they went. They wanted to be like the Egyptians. They stopped circumcising, stopped doing bris milah. That is what Hashem turned the Egyptians against the Jewish people. So let's just sum up what we're doing here. We started off with a discussion about the smiting of the firstborn that we have in this week's Parsha, where Hashem says, I'm going to skip over the Jewish homes. And we said, what are you skipping over? Aren't the Jews living in Goshen? And the answer is, as the Netziv says, no. The Jews went and they left the ghetto, which wasn't the right thing to do, but they left the ghetto and they wanted to be amongst the Egyptians. And therefore, since they were living amongst the Egyptians, Hashem had to pass over their homes. Now, all right. So I just want to add one more thing. And that is, so you got the Jewish homes amongst the Egyptians. How did they get there? Because they left the Jewish ghetto and that's where they settled. But what happened? The Jews were enslaved, right? the Jews were enslaved. So those Jews living amongst the Egyptians, were they enslaved?
They were slaves.
They were enslaved. Why not? They were enslaved. So the whole time they're living there as slaves, and when the time came to leave, they were also told, make a carbon pesach, put the blood over your doorpost. They were doing that amongst the Egyptians themselves. In Goshen, if you're living in Goshen, it wasn't maybe such a big deal to bring a carbon. Okay, I can't say it wasn't. It was, it was part of Egypt. The Egyptians knew what was going on in Goshen. But here you're talking about people who literally were living amongst the Egyptians, and they were doing it. This is part of the greatness, is part of the merit of what they did, of bringing the Karban Pesach. They were doing it literally amongst the Egyptians, living there. But again, they were slaves. Now, what's also interesting is that there's a medrash that says, and Rashi brings it down in next week's Parsha, that during the plague of darkness, which was the plague that preceded the plague of the smiting of the firstborn, 4/5 of the Jewish people died out. Because there were 4/5 of the Jewish people who had no interest in leaving Egypt. They didn't want to leave. With all the miracles and everything going on, they didn't want to leave. So during darkness, they all perished. They all perished.
Did they make a sign?
They didn't even get to the Karban Pesach. They died before the Karban Pesach was even brought. Because they didn't want to leave. So I'm just saying, here you have people that originally went to assimilate. They originally went to be like the Egyptians. The fact that they then became slaves, so, apparently there were many of those living amongst the Egyptians, even though 4/5 of the Jewish people died, and those were people also probably living amongst the Egyptians and wanted to be more like the Egyptians. And for some reason, you would assume they were slaves, but they didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay in Egypt. 4/5, big part.
This is the first time I heard. Yeah. There are many people didn't want to go, but they're still alive.
Didn't want to go.
There are some people didn't want to leave Mitzrayim. Yes.
No. Yeah. Anybody who left was somebody who, according to this, if you got out, you wanted to leave.
But there is no all people leave.
All people didn't leave because but the ones who didn't want to leave died before they left.
There is no people.
Anybody who left was somebody who wanted to leave.
There was no Jewish after.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That is correct. There were no Jews left in Egypt after that.
It is not the same as Babylonian.
No. Good point. Interesting point you're saying. No, differently than that. But the thing is that you have many people, says the Netziv, still living amongst the Egyptians, but they were enslaved, and they kind of learned their lesson. They realized that wanting to be Egyptian, it didn't work. They remained Jews, and they were forced to remain Jews. They became slaves, and they weren't like those 4/5 who wanted to stay, and they wanted to leave, and they went through the Karban Pesach and spreading the blood, literally amongst the Egyptians themselves, themselves. So, it creates a very interesting picture of what was going on. Very interesting picture. And the truth is, you have a point, this whole idea about the 4/5 dying, and clearly those are people who wanted to be, they wanted to stay in Egypt. Why? They were slaves. Why did they want to stay in Egypt? Was it because they just gave up on anything better? Was it because they were still so involved in the idol worship of Egypt that they didn't want to leave it, even if they stayed slaves? Were they somehow or another assimilated and not slaves? I'm not aware of that. But clearly there was a group of people who didn't want to leave, and those are the people who died. The Medrash says, at least according to the Medrash, they died before anything. They weren't even there by the Karban Pesach. But now here we have these people that are living amongst the Egyptians because years before their ancestors moved there, they're still living there, but they are slaves. They want to leave Egypt, and they are amongst the Egyptians themselves, bringing a Karban Pesach and spreading the blood on the doorways. Okay, one other thought for tonight, and that is in Perek Yud Beis, chapter 12, Pasuk Lametes, verse 39. Now this is talking about already after Paro had told them to leave, and they're leaving Egypt. So we read, "Vayofu es habatzek asher etziu Mitzrayim." They baked the dough that they took out from Egypt, ugois matzos, as matzah cakes. Kilei chametz, it didn't rise. Ki garshim Mitzrayim, for they were chased from Egypt. Lo yachulis mameya, they weren't able to delay. They didn't make provisions for themselves. So it says they baked the dough that they took out from Mitzrayim as matzahs, because it did not become chametz, it didn't rise, it didn't become leavened, because they were chased out from Egypt. Okay, so the Torah mentions here, that the bread that they were meant to bake when they left Egypt didn't get a chance to rise because they were so rushed out. Who rushed them out? So simply, the plain explanation would be the Egyptians rushed them out. They didn't want them in there anymore. All the firstborn died, and they wanted them out. So they wanted them out probably at night. The night didn't happen. Parsha says you can leave tonight. Parsha says we're leaving tomorrow. But tomorrow they were chased out. And they were chased out, and they didn't have enough time for the bread to rise. In the Haggadah, when we talk about this as the reason for the mitzvah of matzah. Why do we eat matzah on the night of Pesach? And the answer is to remember the fact that the dough of our forefathers did not have a chance to rise until the Haggadah says, until God revealed himself upon them, to them, and redeemed them. So what rushed them out? Why did they not have enough chance for their dough to rise? Because Hashem revealed himself upon them. Hashem revealed himself to them, and he redeemed them. And it's not necessary. And so according to the Haggadah, the way to look at their being chased out of Egypt was because Hashem had come to take them out, and he took them out before they had a chance for their dough to rise. So the question would be, why did Hashem do that? Why was it so important for Hashem to rush them out to the point that their dough couldn't rise? Let the dough stay. Let the dough rise. Let them bake some bread. Let them bake some regular bread, and that'll be what they're going to eat when they leave Egypt. Why did Hashem rush them out? That's the question. So and the truth is, we read that they couldn't bake their bread because they were rushed out. Why is the Torah telling us this? Why is it so important to know? So the Haggadah tells us this was part of Hashem's plan. Hashem wanted them out before the dough should rise. But why? So there's a number of explanations, and I'm going to share with you the following. And this comes from a commentary on the Haggadah called Ma'aseh Nisim. And the Ma'aseh Nisim, he phrases the question like this. Okay? Now, the fact that we mention that we eat the matzah because we were rushed out would imply that was a good thing, right? Wasn't a bad thing. Are we going to remember? We're going to remember we were rushed out as a bad thing. If remembering that we're rushed out, it's a good thing. And his question is that from the words of the prophets, it seems that actually that being rushed out is not a good thing, because when Mashiach comes, it says, "Lo b'chi prazentate seyu," you won't leave in haste. So is leaving in haste, leaving exile in haste, is that good or is it not good? So says the Ma'aseh Nisim that there's a big difference between leaving Egypt. Leaving Egypt was different. Why? Because, says the Ma'aseh Nisim, the whole idea of what it means that Hashem rushed them out. It's the Haggadah we read that. Let me just. Okay. Matzah, why do we eat matzah? Al shum shlo hispik b'tzeich shem lavasenu lahachmitz. We don't have enough time to rise. Ad shenikla l'mekadosh baruch hu, until Hashem revealed himself. The dough did not have a chance to rise by the time Hashem revealed himself. There is some connection between Hashem revealing himself and the dough not rising. And the answer is because Hashem very much wanted to reveal himself to the Jewish people. The Rebbeinu Shalom wanted the Jewish people to have this experience of a revelation of Hashem. They should be able to experience Hashem's divine presence. But you know what? But that couldn't come in Egypt. That couldn't happen in Egypt. Egypt was full of spiritual impurity. It was full of idol worship. It was full of immorality. It was so full of impurity that Hashem couldn't reveal himself. Hashem's divine presence couldn't be revealed upon the Jewish people while they're in Egypt. So therefore, Hashem rushed them out because he wanted so much to reveal himself to them that when the time came for it, he wanted to do it so much, he rushed them out. Let's go, get out. It's time to get out. Why? Because Hashem wanted so much to reveal himself. It's a sign, says the Masanisim. It was a sign of his great love for us. Why did Hashem rush us out? The rushing out was to show that Hashem wanted to reveal himself to us. When the Jewish people left Egypt, the Masanisim is saying Hashem's divine presence was revealed to them. They were experiencing a revelation of Hashem's presence. They were feeling Hashem's presence in a very unique way, like similar to what the experience in the Beis Hamikdash. The Shekhinah rested in the Beis Hamikdash, and here Hashem wanted to, when they left Egypt, he wanted to reveal himself to them. He wanted them to experience his divine presence, but that couldn't happen in Egypt. So he rushed them out of Egypt because he wanted so much to rest his divine presence in them. So the point of remembering, why did Hashem rush them out? Because he wanted to reveal himself to them. He wanted to rest his divine presence in them. That couldn't happen in Egypt. So therefore, because he wanted it so much, when the time came to leave, he rushed them out. Why? Because he wanted to reveal himself. He wanted so much to make that connection with the Jewish people. So what we're remembering when we eat matzah is that Hashem rushed us out. And why did he rush us out? Ad shenigla. Because he rushed us out. He rushed us out by the time the divine presence rested on us. Since he wanted the divine presence to rest on us, he rushed us out in a way that the dough would not be able to rise. So that's what it means. That's what we're commemorating. That they didn't have a chance for the dough to rise until Hashem's, and they didn't have enough time for the dough to rise by the time Hashem revealed himself to them. That means to say that because Hashem wanted so much to reveal himself to them, that when the time came for that, no, we're not waiting for bread. You have to have something, but we're doing it fast. Why? Because Hashem wants so much to connect with them. It's remembering Hashem's love for us. That is why we're remembering the fact that the dough didn't have a chance to rise. Have a wonderful evening.
What is kind of picture? People and at the same time they decide